We extend releases to the Young Men General Presidency effective August 1st, 2025 as follows. Stephen J. Lund as President, Bradley R. Wilcox as First Counselor, and Michael T. Nelson as Second Counselor.
Hey everybody, welcome in to another Thursday Night Live. And man, before we even started, I got a super chat from my friend Mark Crispin. He's saying he's starting a GoFundMe account to throw Brad Wilcox in jail. You might get some people to donate to that. I'm not totally sure. But as you could tell from our little intro, tonight we are talking about Brad Wilcox. He was just recently released at long last from the Young Men's Presidency. Who knows what's going to happen next? But he's out of commission right now as a church leader. Granted, he's still working at BYU as a professor, and he's got all that going for him. But you know, we can say bye-bye, Brad. He finally went. So we are going to be looking back on some of Brad's best moments tonight. I actually did a video about Brad almost a year ago, where I really looked at all of like these little things that Brad did in his life. It's a pretty fun video. So we're going to be watching some clips from that. And then I'm going to be bringing in my guest tonight, who is also a Brad Wilcox expert and probably has more material on Brad Wilcox than I do. We're going to bring in my friend. I launched this video on his channel almost a year ago. We're going to be watching clips from it, like I said. I will welcome in Divez from Mormon News Roundup. Hey, man.
Hey, Cultch. It is a pleasure to be on the program. So many people have been in this studio. I'm now, for the first time, in the rarefied air of codified ex-Mormon humor. You know, you've invited me so many times onto this channel, and there was always something that came up. It was either a Michelle Stone a live stream, or a Ward radio event that I had to go to, or a Jacob Hansen debate, and it just never really lined up. But tonight the stars are aligning, and I am humbled to be here.
Well, welcome to the channel. Divas is actually a little trivia. Well, I don't know trivia, but just like interesting fact is the first like Thursday Night Live show that I did, he kind of put me up to it. And I think you were my moderator at the time and were kind of helping me through it because I didn't know how to use StreamYard at all. You remember that when we did just like all the parody songs?
Yeah, that was fantastic. You know, that was one of your best live streams. You know, that was Cultch in your purest form, vibing with all of your incredible ex-Mormon parody songs that are just so powerful. So many of them are very, very touching. I do remember that very first live stream. Did a very good job. My very first live stream was much, much worse than yours. So yeah, the Thursday nights, it's almost been a year. But if we go back, like you said, you launched your YouTube channel on the Mormon News Roundup almost exactly 1 year ago, and it was with regards to one Bradley R. Wilcox. So we're bringing things full circle with an anniversary show celebrating 1 year of codified ex-Mormon humor.
That's right. And we got our friend Kendall in the chat who's saying that thank you for saving him from watching Porch Time tonight. So if anyone does not want to watch us tonight, Porch Time is going to be on, and I think they're covering some Maven stuff. So if that interests you, feel free to migrate over there. But I hope you guys will stay with us. We're still going to have a good show. Do you want to give people just a general just intro to Brad Wilcox? I think most people here are familiar with him, but just in case.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Bradley R. Wilcox was a general officer for the church from 2020 until he was just released here in the Last Show Conference in 2025. He spent 5 years either as the second counselor or the first counselor. Backing way up, he was a BYU graduate himself. In fact, his parents, I believe, were mission presidents in Africa way back in a time. He spent part of his life growing up in Ethiopia, born into the Latter-day Saint faith, went on a mission to Chile, eventually went to BYU, got a degree in elementary education, taught in the Provo School District, which I also, by the way, taught at Provo School District. You know, Brad Wilcox and I have a lot in common. Eventually got a master's degree, joined
Hopefully
the
not that much.
Well, maybe in another dimension, multi-dimensional, I could be a Brad Wilcox. Well, we'll find out. I mean, he joined the CES. You know, he taught for the seminary programs, and also he became incredibly viral for his EFY talks. For those of you who are not familiar, it was called Especially for Youth, which are typically summertime retreats, kind of like a vacation Bible school for Latter-day Saints. It's been renamed now to FSY, for the strength of the youth. My son, by the way, last year went to FSY, by the way, Cultch. We still attend those from time to time. Anyway, he became very viral with his talks, and he's also written about 30 or 40 books, especially those on grace and avoiding toxic perfectionism. And he was eventually elevated to become a BYU professor in the Department of Ancient Scripture. He's become somewhat notorious, as we're going to find out, for a couple of his more controversial talks, which we're going to talk about today. How's that for a summary?
That works. I think Ted says Brad Wilcox thinks a cell phone is like a magic rock. So that's also important to point out, because we'll be covering some of that tonight. But yeah, let's get into our first clip. This is just kind of an intro to Brad. You gave a good intro, but we're going to watch you and me. A lot of this is like Dives has done stuff and I've done stuff, and we've taken them and we've mashed them together for a lot of this. But
right. So I've always said here, Cultch, that anything that you can do, I can do much, much worse.
There you go. Well, let's see. Let's see if that's right.
By way of background, Brad Wilcox is a general authority of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's currently the first counselor in the Young Men's General Presidency. He's also a professor at Brigham Young University, specializing in religion and education. Wilcox has been long known for his approachable teaching style, and he's a prominent speaker at church events like BYU Education Week or Especially for Youth. His focus on grace, leadership, and youth development have made him a notable figure within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints greater community. But if you want a more snarky introduction to Brad Wilcox, here you go.
Okay. Meet Brad Wilcox. He's a general authority for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A lot of people don't know this about Brad, but he loves gold.
I love gold!
He loves the golden plates, the golden girls, and Golden Corral. If you're old like me, you might remember Brad as an EFY speaker from the 90s. If you were a 5th or 6th grade boy in Utah, Brad may have been your sex ed teacher. And if you attend or have attended BYU, you might know Brad as the professor of ancient scripture. Now, what scripture, you might ask? The Book of Mormon, of course. But what Brad is most well known for is the stupid shit that keeps coming out of his mouth when the cameras are rolling.
Got a little nervous when my daughter started blessing the sacrament, but
Okay. So that's our intro. Let's roll into our next clip. Unless you have anything you want to say about that intro, Dives.
No, I like to see the contrast between the vanilla, boring Mormon News Roundup and the exciting, peppy, codified Exmormon humor. You cannot see a more diametric contrast than that right there. That's what makes your stuff famous. So well done.
Well, like Jacob Hansen, we're all about comparing and contrasting. But instead of truths and falsehoods, it's just your channel and my channel tonight. So this next clip, it goes into, you had mentioned that Brad is a professor at BYU, right?
I like to use the term, when it comes to Brad Wilcox at BYU, I like to use the term here, professor in quotes. That's just, now, he does have a terminal degree, but it is in education and curriculum from the University of Wyoming. And of course, we're going to bring this up later, but how that makes him qualified to be a professor of, wait for it, ancient scripture at BYU? Education, ancient scripture. I don't see how these two things are possibly related, but at BYU, that doesn't matter, because Brad Wilcox has always been, ever since his EFY days back in the early 1990s when he started writing his books. Now he's the golden boy, and I guess qualifications, publications, scholarship, that doesn't matter because he's quote unquote popular.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into this and we'll take a look at Brad as a professor at BYU.
Controversial rock in the hat narrative about how the Book of Mormon was translated is peak apologetic cringe. His analogy of comparing a seer stone to a modern day cell phone is laughable. I mean, cell phones are backed by science. We understand how they work. It's technology that's been developed over decades. But there's zero evidence for Joseph Smith's rock in the hat method. Brad's mental gymnastics only make the LDS Church's truth claims look even more ridiculous. Brad is going to top himself in this next one, where he's going to explain Joseph Smith's famous rock in the hat, and he's going to make this very understandable for all of us. Unfortunately, it is going to be cringeworthy, as everything that he does simply is.
The Professor.
I'm Brad Wilcox, and I'm starting a new semester teaching Book of Mormon at BYU. And I thought I'd share with you some of the visual aids that I use with my students. This is a replica of the Seer stone, or one of the Seer stones that Joseph Smith had. This was the stone that he found in a well when digging a well when he was a young man. And then when he would look into the stone, he would be able to see things that other people could not see.
I need to have them somewhere dark so I can read the spiritual light.
Oh, okay, write this down. Christ appeared before the Nephites.
And that's how the Book of Mormon was written. Dum 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 dum.
And part of the translation of the Book of Mormon was done with the Urim and Thummim, but part of the translation was also done with a seer stone, or several seer stones. Now, people often get confused because they hear that Joseph Smith put a seer stone inside of a hat and then would look into the hat to see the seer stone.
Dad, did you know that Joseph Smith guy read the Book of Mormon out of a hat?
And?
It's just that the Book of Mormon says a lot of strange stuff, like that Adam and Eve lived in Jackson County, Missouri.
Yes?
But school taught me that the first man and woman lived in Africa.
Well, you can't believe everything school tells you, Stan.
And they think it sounds weird. But when I compare for my students the seer stone to a cell phone, and I say, hey, a smooth surface on which words appear that can be read, then it makes more sense to them. I also say, hey, when you're out on a sunny day and you're trying to look at your cell phone, you wish it were darker. We often go like this to try to see the words better. Well, no wonder Joseph Smith put his cell phone or his seer stone in the hat so that he could block out light and he could see what was being written, what was given to him on the seer stone a little clearer. So maybe with these visuals in mind, then it will help you understand a little better, just like I hope it helps my students understand a little bit better about the translation process of the Book of Mormon.
So what do you think about Brad's famous lesson of the seer stone is like a cell phone, a smooth surface on which words appear?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Just somebody in the chat said, why was he released? You're jumping ahead. Yes, it was his time to be released, by the way. It was usually you're a general officer for about 5 years, so this was probably about the right amount of time. But as far as comparing a rock in a hat to a cell phone, of course, this is absolutely peak cringe. We know how cell phones work. You can examine them. You can show it to someone else. There's no quote-unquote magic that's responsible. You can ask the Verizon company or AT&T. You can have other people objectively verify that a text message or a signal has gone through. We know the technology that's associated with this. It's repeatable. It's demonstrable. It's called evidence. There's nothing supernatural about it. Comparing a supernatural rock with a perfectly natural cell phone, these two have nothing in common. And let's not forget that the church still has this chocolate-colored egg-shaped seer stone in the church's vault. And if you believe, believe Grant Palmer, he says that he's seen a couple of other stones that the church has that they won't bring out of the vaults. Okay, if this is just like a cell phone, then why hasn't President Nelson or anyone else used it to, I don't know, bring forth additional revelations? Probably because nobody can get the damn thing to work, which is totally different than your cell phone. Whereas if it's broken or we have an issue with it, it can be serviced. So yes, I mean, this apologetic really falls flat.
Corey's asking, do you think anyone has ever tried to use it? You think Nelson sneaks into the vault with the chocolate-covered seer stone and goes, hello?
Well, I actually recently released a video on this too. It's, there's a long history in Mormonism of supernatural objects. We have Joseph Smith's his coffin. They took wooden chunks out of his coffin and made canes with them, and those canes were actually given to a lot of different people and supposedly had healing abilities. Joseph Smith had handkerchiefs that he would bless people with when he was in Nauvoo and they were suffering from cholera or dysentery, and then those were imbued with the presence of Joseph Smith and could heal other people.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's cool. Yeah, I was just recently released the video on that just here a couple of days ago. There's lots of supernatural objects. There's talisman. There's dowsing rods. Remember the dowsing rod of Oliver Cowdery? Yeah, I mean that was a talisman. Right. That Brigham Young allegedly used dowsing rods to find the location for the Salt Lake Temple. There's a long line of these mystical and magical objects in Mormonism that has quietly been phased out as we, as modernization, secularization, and the entire early Mormonism and the magic worldview is, slowly dissipates, and the supposed revelations, miracles, visions, healings, interpretations of tongues, as those have dried up. I doubt that anybody has really tried to take the rock and a hat for a trip, but I really don't know.
Yeah. Well, that Brad is not the only person who has made this comparison of a seer stone to an iPhone. So Colby here says, Rusty put the stone in a hat and heard, "Hello, is it me you're looking for?" That would be cool. You guys remember that video of Nelson where he kind of almost puts the hat up to his face?
Yes, I definitely remember. Remember, Brad Wilcox and President Nelson both have taken out the hat, but they refused to put their face fully into the hat. They would only bring it up about 6 inches away, when we know that Joseph Smith used it to make sure that there was absolutely no light. Unfortunately, that looks absolutely ridiculous, so they won't do what Joseph Smith did.
They need to. All right, you want to move on to the next one? So we mentioned earlier that Brad teaches maturation classes, or in layman's terms, he's a sex ed teacher at places. Yes. So let's let people learn about that. I'm going to add this to the stage.
Maturation classes in Utah's public schools.
Here in Utah, he actually teaches maturation and sexuality classes to young people. I think it's junior high age.
In the public schools.
In the public schools. I think a year ago or so, this kind of came out that he's been doing this, and people wondered what was the credential, what was the experience, why was he doing this? I mean, your mind kind of goes there, but there is that connection where he does work with youth and counsel on maturation and things like that. So I can't explain it.
The sexual education teacher.
He is a prominent figure in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with no background in health education.
So why does he get asked to go to public schools to talk to boys about puberty?
No idea.
And how good is he?
Not good.
I'm Brad Wilcox, and I'm going to be presenting a maturation clinic here at the school in just a few minutes.
This is how a generation of Utah boys met Wilcox.
Boys, in the next few minutes, you're going to hear some really grown-up words.
For decades, he's gone to public schools, giving 5th or 6th grade boys 50-minute lectures on maturation.
He has an erection.
Fox 13 News found public records showing in recent years Wilcox has given the talk at schools in the Alpine District, the Canyon School District, the Granite School District, and at least 2 public charter schools. Records show Wilcox typically receives $200 per lecture. Paige Beach is a parent who was among those that recently expressed their concerns on social media about Wilcox and his maturation lectures.
I just don't think he has this specialized education and qualifications. I think they should be taught by a qualified health professional.
A maturation lecture for girls is taught separately. Our review of those presentations show they are typically led by nurses. Wilcox has been open about how he is not a health professional.
He's banking on that kind of moral authority that he has in the community, and I would prefer to judge someone by their actual education and experience.
State regulations also say school districts are supposed to develop a list of puberty and sex ed materials and presenters. But Fox 13 found evidence some schools are relying on word of mouth. On a podcast in 2018, Wilcox explained,
I have enough principal friends out there that always call me and say,
Get over here, I need you to do the maturation clinic.
We asked the school districts for copies of any bids or requests for proposals for the maturation lectures. None had any.
And even for your nipples to stick out away from your body. Now, at first you're freaking out. You're like, I'm turning into my mom. But you're not.
All right, so thoughts on the Mr. Sex Education himself, Brad Wilcox?
I understand that Brad has an elementary education degree. My wife has an elementary education degree. I taught elementary education as well, so I know a little bit about this particular subject. Look, just because you have an elementary education degree does not mean that you're qualified to teach every possible subject in an elementary school setting. You need to have people who are qualified. You know, the music teachers need to have specific credentials, the special education teachers, the nurses, even some of the particular staff have to have additional credentials. I'm not aware that Brad Wilcox fits the bill here for having those credentials. Typically, in these maturation settings in the public schools, you're going to have somebody with a healthcare background, somebody who is a nurse, maybe somebody who is a doctor, somebody with specific, even in some states, Cultch, you're going to have specific credentials that are for a health, a sex ed credential that's on top of that. There can be national certifications. There can be continuing education. Is Brad Wilcox doing all of these things, or does he just have some people on a speed dial because he's a Mormon General Authority or general officer, or he was in the public schools? There's a serious problem here with the separation of church and state in these situations. Look, we don't need people with a religious bias teaching sexual maturation classes in our public schools. And just real quick, I know this is kind of long. If you go back and look at Brad Wilcox's 2000 book, Growing Up Gospel Answers About Maturation and Sex, that is currently out of print, when you read that, it talks about homosexuality in the book. And he talks about how basically it's the Spencer Kimball idea that homosexuality is some kind of a perversion. Now, supposedly he keeps these views out of the public school, but listen to me. When you have that kind of a regressive view, some of it can creep out into how you're teaching other people. He's not qualified. He's not the right person. He doesn't have the particular credentials. We have a conflict of interest with church and state. And what we need is people who, in Mormonism, it's all about who has authority. I don't care about authority. The only thing I care about is credentials and experience, and he doesn't have it.
Right. No, he doesn't. I think people just like him. You know, say what you want about Brad. I think people who know him, he's a likable guy. So people are just like, yeah, that's Brad. He's fun. The kids enjoy him. Let's get over here. They'll tell him about their penis. It'll be cool. We'll give him $200 and call it a day.
Right. If I could just add on to that, you know, I grew up with Brad Wilcox and the tapes. This was back in the 90s when all we had is tapes. And the tapes are so entertaining. He does a great job of the storytelling. And I think that a lot of naive, even school administrators say, well, if he can teach great gospel stories about being kind to others, about how you should, you know, obey your parents and be a good community member, then he must be able to teach people about maturation. Those two things absolutely do not follow. And today, Cultch, when I was preparing for this episode, because I tend to over-prepare, I went back and listened to a bunch of Brad Wilcox's old speeches, especially the ones that he gave around the 90s or early 2000s. They're really engaging. He's such a great storyteller. If he leaves some of the ridiculous nonsense behind and just talks about how you should be a good person to your family and your community and that you should be a good church member, he can be incredibly powerful. And that is what people think, okay, he has these great tapes. My kids loved him at EFY. Let's have him teach sex ed. that just doesn't follow.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It's just weird. So Brad was a professor. He did the teaching sex ed in the schools. Maybe he still does. I don't know. But I mean, that's a pretty good, if you can get $200 here and there for doing that, that's not bad. But then what Brad, I think, is most famous and infamous for is the fireside he did. What was it? A tri-state fireside in Alpine, Utah.
Right. And I believe it was April of 2022.
Yes. And it was, this was during COVID. So they were kind of live streaming stuff for people who couldn't be there. And that's why people got to see it who wouldn't have normally been there to see Brad talk. And that's why he said some interesting things. And we've got a couple different clips from different stuff he said. So these first three are all going to be Dives, stuff that you've done on it. So this first one is, this is when Brad brought up that if you leave the church, you fill in the blank, Dives. If you leave the church, you
lose everything. And this has been a repeated mantra of Brad Wilcox, even after this Tri-State Fireside and in other locations. He wants to paint he paints the world as sheep and goats. And if you leave the church, you're a goat, wheat and tares, and that your countenance falls when you leave the church. He has a continuous beating the drum of demonizing those who leave the church, of saying that they are fallen, they are sinful, they're following the devil. And even after he made a bad apology about this Tri-State Fireside, which, by the way, he did not apologize to any ex-Mormons.
We'll watch that too.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm jumping the gun.
No, you're good. You're good.
He has an incredible penchant for trying to dunk on the people who lose faith in the church, and it is highly disturbing.
Yep, he does. Aaron Hart here said, Cultch, don't think about the blacks not getting the priesthood till 1978. Think about the whites who had to wait till 1830 and were foreshadowing. That was the big thing he said in that fireside that got people a little upset. And then people like us who went to watch the whole thing, we found a lot of other fun stuff. So let's watch this where Brad tells us, if you leave the church, you lose everything.
Right.
You lose everything. It often means gaining freedom and a life built on personal authenticity. He says if you leave the church, you will lose absolutely everything.
I have a really simple question for you. Is this true?
I hope you realize that if you walk away from this religion, you lose everything. You lose everything. Everything that truly matters most.
Do you lose everything? Current members, do you believe this? Ex-members, was this your experience? Let me know your answer in the comments.
Landon, if you walk away from the church, do you lose everything?
Well, you do lose your family in a lot of cases, but that's not because you walked away. It's because they teach them to walk away from you. So that to me is the sad part, is they want you to believe you lose everything. But my experience has been, I found a whole new way of viewing the world, a whole new life focus, and it's been exciting to leave. I'm glad I did.
I think most people that actually do step away, they do not feel they have lost everything. However, exactly what Landon said, their family feels they've lost everything. And that's what makes it so sad, is that your family is devastated for you. It usually causes a rift. As Landon said, you can lose family members, you can lose connection. And so it's not that you're losing, that the believers have been told that you're going to lose everything. And that's how they operate. That's the mindset. And they're devastated for you.
Yeah. So what do you think of that clip, Vives?
Yeah, I mean, this is I just want to say one thing before we get too much further into the episode. This isn't necessarily for us to necessarily dunk on Brad Wilcox, because Brad Wilcox is really just part of a larger system. Brad is not out here teaching quote unquote false doctrine or something that does not align with the church's teachings. The church has a consistent pattern of demonizing those who leave. It's part of why a lot of people would consider the church to be a high demand religion. There's never any rational justification for leaving the church. And the church claims to have a monopoly on joy in this life, meaning that if you leave, then you've lost that joy. That's what he's meaning by you lose everything. And he thinks that you lose your eternal exaltation, you learn the only ability to have happiness, you lose all of this stuff. You know, I remember when I had John Larson on the Mormon News Roundup, and we were talking about something similar, and he said, listen, when you're in Mormonism, you're in a box. And as John Larson said, we keep telling people like Brad Wilcox that you're the one who's in the effing box. And as John Larson didn't use that kind of language, but I'm not John Larson. Brad is the one who's in a box. When you're outside of the church, what you gain is your personal autonomy. You regain your ability to have confidence in yourself. You realize that you're not fallen, that you're not sinful, that you don't need a savior, and that you don't need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars into an illegal clandestine hedge fund for $1 trillion organization. You do gain a lot. But as Rebecca Biblioteca said, it can be incredibly stressful, especially when a lot of us have family members who are still believing, or loved ones who still believe. And those relationships can become incredibly strained, incredibly stressed. And yes, you will lose something. Everyone that I've ever talked to who has quote unquote left the church or no longer attends loses something. The question is, what do you gain? And that for me is the more important question.
Yeah. Someone earlier said, that shunning in the LDS church is real. And I think it is real. I mean, we don't have anything on Jehovah's Witnesses. They know how to shun, but I think a lot of active members would probably push back on that and say we don't shun people who leave. What do you think?
As you said, Jehovah's Witnesses have a far more codified shunning system. So do some of the like the Amish or the Mennonites actually have it as part of their, I guess, their liturgy, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints supposedly doesn't. But you talk to a lot of people when you watch Mormon stories, and you see sometimes how they realize that after they stop going to church, people in the church will treat them very much differently. They won't invite them to the same type of events that they used to go to. And you can kind of find out that some of the quote unquote friends that you had really turn their backs on you. And I've experienced the same type of thing now that I don't really go to church much anymore, is that some of my family members are more restrained and where there's a lot more distance between us. And even the ward members here that we used to do a lot of activities to, a lot of these things, they tend to fall away. So it may not be a formalized shunning process, but it can feel like it, especially to some people whose relationships are in the church are really important to them. When they step back from that, when they try to step back from the church and maintain those relationships, they come to find out that there can be a lot of difficulties in doing that. Like, oh, I don't want my kids to go over to her house because now she drinks coffee. I mean, this is legit, real things that actually happen. So it's a problem in the church as a whole. Just one last thing, the church used to in the Deseret News, it used to publish all of the quote unquote excommunications and apostates for decades. Why did they do that? They did that in sort of so they would demonize them so that they wouldn't be a part of the community. Brigham Young, for instance, used to just say, here's the apostates and no one should ever have dealings with them. Yes, it's gotten a little bit better, but it still has a lot more. It needs to get a lot further before the church can be considered a healthy organization. Just the last thought on this. You can determine, I've heard this said before, you can determine how healthy an organization is by how they treat people who leave. If when you leave an organization, they throw you a party, they give you a certificate, and they say, thanks so much for being a part of this. I know you're only here for a short time. Best of luck. We'll be rooting for you. Come back anytime. We love you and good luck to you in the future. Let us know what you're doing. That's a healthy organization. That absolutely does not happen as a general rule in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, our next clip of funny stuff that Brad said, he talked about people playing church. I think some of you will remember this one. It's a good one. An oldie but a goodie.
Just merely playing church, claiming that Mormonism is the only one who really holds the authority from God. This kind of religious elitism is definitely offensive and ignores the rich spirituality of other faiths.
My kids played church. They'd pull out the stuffed animals, they'd put them on the couch, they'd sing the song, they'd do the talk. Got a little nervous when my daughter started blessing the sacrament, but they'd play church. And I used to think, oh, that's so cute. It's so cute. But now I'm older and I realize it wasn't just cute. It's actually what most people in the world are doing. They're playing church. They're sincere. They want it to count. But they don't have the authority. They don't have God's permission.
This is what our church leaders are saying about other Christians behind closed doors.
Brad's comments are a perfect example of the Mormon superiority complex.
All right, Diva. So is that Mormon doublespeak? When they're talking to a certain crowd, they're going to say one thing, but if Brad was in front of fellow Christians, or Christians, as our friend Alex O'Connor would say, that he wouldn't talk like that in front of them?
I definitely think that he's speaking out both sides of the mouth. See, the church really craves to be a player in the wider Christian communities. The church often is part of these interfaith groups. In fact, the church has filed amicus briefs, especially to try to strip gay people of their rights with lots of other churches. If you look at the Mormon Leaks videotapes, who did they have as part of the Mormon Leaks? Actually, some of the Christian leaders came in and briefed the Mormon leaders on their war against gay marriage. They want to be seen as a big player. So when they go out for these conferences, and even the church has put some on themselves, they talk about Christian brotherhood. We're all worshipers of Jesus. We're all followers of the Prince of Peace. But then when we get behind closed doors, it's a totally different message. They're bankrupt. It goes back to like Joseph Smith. They, what did he say? They are all the professors of religion are all corrupt. There's a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. That's the inherent message here that is what when John DeLynn reviewed these type of clips, when John DeLynn reviewed them, he said that this is a deeply ingrained anti-Christian bias that seeps out of everything that, as like we said, it's not just about Brad Wilcox, it's about the church in general. It doesn't play nice in the sandbox. When you look, Cultch, at some of the surveys that have been put out recently about how people view Latter-day Saints, Mormons, how people view Latter-day Saints is almost at the bottom of the list.
It's not well,
even atheists are higher. The only people lower are like Satanists. And why is that? It's because of these talks right here that come out that said that you're just playing around. Your entire life is bankrupt. You have no purpose. You have no authority. And you have to come to us in order to find joy and happiness. We have to come to Brad Wilcox to find happiness in our life. People are rightly offended by these type of sentiments.
Well, they throw them a little help there. They say they have truth. They just don't have all the truth. So take your truth and, bring it here and let us show you what we can add to it. That's kind of their nice spin on you're wrong, we're right.
Yeah, in fact, in that same talk here, Brad Wilcox talks about how there's a big piano and all the other religions, all the other worldviews just have a few of the keys, but we have all of the keys of the piano. And people naturally are pretty taken back by that. And if you think about that clip as well, that clip has some of the inherent sexism that came along with this talk, which absolutely permeates every single part of this, where he's somehow worried about his daughter passing the sacrament, which, by the way, there's nothing in the Doctrine and Covenants whatsoever that says that a person has to have the quote unquote priesthood to pass the sacrament. In fact, when you pass it down the line, women pass it to men. There's nothing that says that someone can't hold a sacrament tray. In fact, that's one of the best reforms that I think that the church could possibly do, would be to just say, let girls pass the sacrament. That's not an ordinance. The blessing of it is the ordinance. So anyway,
I heard they're kind of piloting that. Did you hear that too? How they're letting girls take the sacrament into like the nursing mother's room to give it to them?
Yeah, I'd heard that.
Yeah, so maybe that's their way of just starting very small and working up. When I was in the church, there were never enough deacons to pass the sacrament. So they should get the girls in on that. It would help out with the numbers. Well, go ahead.
If you think about what the church has done, especially since, in the temples, for instance, now women can be witnesses in the temple, and they can also do other things. The church is very, very, very slowly trying to expand some of the things that they allow women to do. Of course, it is woefully falling short, and this talk is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So speaking of women, let's go ahead and show this next clip where Brad basically mocks women about, the priesthood, because that's what we do in the church.
To dress, Wilcox also patronizes women, telling them that they shouldn't feel bad about not having the priesthood, as if motherhood somehow justifies the gender inequality in Mormonism.
Also, got a little nervous when my daughter started passing the sacrament. I know it was a joke, but is the Mormon patriarchal ego so fragile that your little daughter pretending to enact a priesthood ordinance threatens it?
And here's how Tanner and Samantha over there at Zelf on the Shelf treated this same sexist rant.
Yeah, but Brother Wilcox, how come the girls don't have the priesthood? I mean, that's what I want to know. How come the girls don't have the priesthood? What's up with that? How come the girls come? Yeah, how come the girls come? How come the girls come? Yeah, that's what I want to know. Girls don't have the priesthood. What's up with that? Brother Wilcox, how come the girls don't have the priesthood? I don't know. Girls, you're going to hear a lot of people say a lot of things, and many of them say them with very angry voices.
Why don't you give women the priesthood?
Just like that. Just because somebody's angry doesn't necessarily make him or her
right.
Just because somebody's loud doesn't necessarily make him or her right.
Why don't you give women the priesthood?
I was at a professional conference for BYU. I had a name tag. It said Brad Wilcox, Brigham Young University. Some lady walked up to me that I didn't even know. She sees my name tag and she's like, oh, how come the girls come?
Yeah.
How come the girls come?
Yeah.
What the heck are they talking about? Seriously?
Brad, I think Brad, like most of the LDS leaders, he likes to gaslight the girls, make them feel more important, you don't need the priesthood. What are you talking about? You have the priesthood. That's the new thing. Have you noticed that's the new thing they're doing, that like women do hold the priesthood?
Well, I'll just a small clarification. From my reading, the new thing is women have access to the power of the priesthood, access to the power of the priesthood, or access. So both men and women have access to the priesthood. That's the new gaslighting thing, that we got from Jay and Ed Dennis in the Relief Society last year, that says that there's no other organization that I'm familiar with that gives more power and authority to women, because women have access to the priesthood, even though they don't hold it themselves. That's the new spin to try to talk about equality. And speaking of equality, Elder Rendland here, just in the last month or so, talked about the problem with the inequality in the church. And he says that it is systemic, and that there's really no solution to it. This isn't something that's being prayed about. This isn't something that is being worked on. And David Bednar, if you go back to the National Press Club briefing back in 2022, he was also asked about women's equality in the church. He also said that this is not an issue in which the brethren are actively engaged in. This is in slight contrast to, if you think about like the priesthood ban that lasted until 1978, there was lots of clues way ahead of that lifting of that ban that said that Spencer Kimball and others were like, we are thinking this is a possible error. We realize this is harming people. We are thinking about this issue. That is not the case with women's issues at all. And remember, David Bednar is a generational prophet. They're going to be looking to him, though there's going to be a prophet in between now and Bednar, they will still look to him because he is going to be so pivotal. And when David Bednar says that what he said is we follow the pattern that was in the Bible. Well, so much for modern revelation. Yeah, we understand what's in the Bible if we can have even confidence of what happened in it. It's not an issue that troubles these brethren whatsoever. And just the last thought, I released a video here this last week based on Abby Hansen's Exponent 2 article, which talked about how women in the church, when their apostles are called into the apostleship, they are never, ever consulted before these lifelong callings that will demonstrably change the trajectory of their lives for the rest of their days. They're just told to wait literally outside when they could be brought into the room. And this includes Patrick Huron, who was called to be an apostle just this last year. Women are systemically excluded from even these basic decisions that will affect them in profound ways. The Mormon Church is still incredibly sexist to its core.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the women out there would agree with that, and probably a lot of the men too. All right, so you had mentioned 1978 in the priesthood and temple ban, and that's a great segue into when Brad Wilcox basically stepped in shit during this talk. So let's watch good old Brad do that. Never gets old.
Mormonism's racist past is one of the most tone-dead and offensive apologetics ever by a church leader. His misguided apologetics really downplay the suffering of black members, while attempting to make it all about white people. Wilcox's remarks were historically inaccurate and highly offensive.
Let's hear what Brad Wilcox says about black members of the church and also just black people in general.
The Alpine shit show.
Oh no. This is
We
tough.
feel so blessed to have Brother Wilcox here with us today.
Now, sadly, you live in a time where a lot of people get uptight about priesthood issues. It's one of the most glorious things we have in the church, and yet people want to sit and fight about it and get uptight about it.
Oh, no.
Now, I don't mean to oversimplify a complex issue, but I sure think we make it a little harder than it needs to be. How come the blacks didn't get the priesthood until 1978? What's up with that, Brother Wilcox? What, Brigham Young was a jerk? Members of the church were prejudiced? Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe instead of saying, why did the blacks have to wait until 1978? Maybe what we should be asking is, why did the whites and other races have to wait until 1829? And R stands for refreshments. Are we having refreshments? In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
We got a dead man walking here.
Oh, man.
Dead man walking.
All right, Divas. What was your reaction? Like the first, when this went down and you heard that, what was your reaction to Brad and his comments?
Like I said, this is I know it's easy to dunk on Brad Wilcox, and we talked before the show that it's easier than shooting fish in a barrel. And we both have a lot of content on him. And it's not, this is important. It's not that Brad Wilcox said anything that was not in accordance with church teachings and church doctrine. The problem, the problem with Brad is that he's used to giving talks to his EFY speakers, his FSY, the Church Education Week, his naive BYU students, his firesides, and when he was in the stake presidency, his congregations. Those people will generally just lap up whatever he says because of his charisma, his ability to deliver good stories, and just his personality cult that's around him. The problem is that he fails to realize that some of these harmful messages then go public. This is the whole thing about Mormonism. You say one thing in public to people like a general conference where you water down all of the controversies and you don't get into any of the details because they're embarrassing. But in private, you actually tell people what the church doctrine and policies are. Brad said the quiet part out loud about this, and he ended up paying a huge consequence for it.
Yeah, he did. This was so, when it happened, like if you guys go back to it, and some of you may be new ex-Mormons and weren't in the space when this went down, it was big. Like everybody was doing episodes on this. Everybody was talking about it. And you'll see in some of our next clips that we're going to play how big it was that it was on the news in Utah. Yeah. Brad had to give public apologies. So it was pretty crazy.
You know, Mormon stories. Go
ahead.
Mormon Stories did a series of episodes on this, and I believe that this was one of the most viral video clips of all time, where they released an episode on it, and they got 50,000 views in one day, in just one day on Brad Wilcox. And in Mormonism, getting 50,000 views on a Mormon video in one day is virtually unprecedented. This absolutely went viral once again, and it really takes us back to and we talked about this before the show. If you think back to Randy Bott, who was in 2012, also a BYU professor. This was at the time that Mitt Romney was running for president, and a journalist from out east, I think it was The Atlantic, if I'm not mistaken, came out and it was knocking on doors and ended up interviewing Randy Bott, and he ended up going viral for saying something very similar about the racism in the Mormon church. In other words, this was God. See, this is what Randy Bott and Brad Wilcox both do. They don't want to take any accountability for their wrongs, for the racism in church history, for the fact that Brigham Young was one of the most horrifically racist people of all time. They want to pin this on God. Oh, it's God's fault that whatever X, Y, Z happened, instead of trying to take personal accountability. That's wrong. And that's one reason that people are generally, they're pretty forgiving. Let's be honest. I mean, if you say, you know what, we've made mistakes in the past. This is what Matt Harris in his series, Second Class Saints, said. If the church would just take ownership, take responsibility, say, we made mistakes, we harmed people, issue apologies, and then say, hey, we've made amends and we're trying to fix things. President Nelson himself has tried to partner with the NAACP a number of times. He has really tried to reach out and say that we're all bond and free, black and white, male and female, we're all the same unto God. He's tried to take some steps, but there's just this simmering malcontent that's underneath the surface with the racism that was never dealt with. And if you think about like Jonathan Streeter's fake apology about the race in the priesthood ban, you can see what a wound that apparently inadvertently opened up. This is still a festering wound, and Brad Wilcox did absolutely no favors to himself or the church with this particular racist diatribe.
Yep, I would agree with that. And the fact that the church won't apologize, you know, like they've got the Gospel Topics essay on this where they admit that, like, I don't know, what's the exact wording they used? They didn't apologize.
They said we disavow the teachings in the past based on the curse of Cain, and also that they disavowed specifically two things: that black persons were cursed, represent the curse of Cain on the earth, which was taught by so many Mormon leaders, and also that black persons were either fence sitters or neutral in the war in heaven. Those are the two things that they disavowed. Even in the last month, though, the church also reflected with a new Q&A session, a section of the Gospel Topics essays where they get into the race and the priesthood ban just a little bit more to flesh things out. I don't think we have enough time to go over that. But I mean, in my opinion, the best route is what Matt Harris said, or even what your bro, Jacob Hansen, said. When he was on with the Cosmic Skeptic, as you recall, what he said about the race and the priesthood ban is that he said that the racist teachings of the day crept into the church and that they were wrong. That is probably the best approach to take rather than trying to throw God under the bus.
Yeah, that's one of the few times that I'll agree with Jacob and be like, you know what? He's right. Like, he'll say that Brigham Young was racist. He'll flat out say it. A lot of members won't say that. They won't go there. They might blame it. A big thing I hear is they blame it on the Protestant church. Like, this was a Protestant thing, and it just kind of leaked into the church. But then it's like, well, then they also like to say that Joseph Smith was very progressive and he ordained black men to the priesthood and he ran for the presidency on abolition. And so it's weird that they say that the guy who started it was very into letting black people have the priesthood. Everyone who came after, they were a bunch of racist jerks. But it's not their fault. They were just people of their time.
Right.
Yeah. And if you like that, I just recently did a parody of Toto's Africa, but I made it Mormon, and you should go check that out. Talks about Brigham Young and Joseph Smith. A little plug for myself. All right, so let's get into Brad's apologies. After this happened, he caught a lot of shit, rightfully so, and he had to get on the apology tour. So let's watch our clip on that.
Right. Guys, help me out. Help me.
Okay, so he is Teflon Brad. I thought for sure that was the end of him. Didn't you also? There's no way that you come back from a statement like that. And everything, all the aftermath, there's no way that you come back. Not only did he come back, he's promoted into the Young Men's Presidency. He's now using his middle initial and going by Brad Lee. He's obviously on the fast track to become an apostle. I just can't fathom it. I cannot fathom it.
Why are we asking the wrong question about all of this anyway? It's all about the whites, isn't it, Landon?
Why is Brad being promoted in the church? That almost shows that the church is fully supporting what Brad is saying.
And it led to a huge backlash. Yet a short time later, the LDS Church elevated him to a higher position. And let's check out that Brad Wilcox apology.
A leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has received some backlash after comments he made at a youth fireside in Alpine on Sunday. Brad Wilcox was talking about questions he sometimes gets regarding why the church's priesthood was withheld from black men.
How come the blacks didn't get the priesthood until 1978? What's up with that, Brother Wilcox? What, Brigham Young was a jerk? Members of the church were prejudiced? Maybe what we should be asking is, why did the whites have to wait until 1829?
After his comments went viral, Wilcox issued a public apology, saying he made a serious mistake and was truly sorry. But at least one student at BYU, where Wilcox teaches religion, says the comments are very upsetting.
What's difficult about the apology is that I know multiple people that have heard him say either the same thing, something similar, or worse.
How come the blacks didn't get the priesthood until 1978? What's up with that, Brother Wilcox? What, Brigham Young was a jerk? Members of the church were prejudiced? Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe instead of asking, why did the blacks get the priesthood until 1978, we should be asking, why did everybody else and other races have to wait until 1829?
And when they talked to him privately about it, there was no type of apology or change in action, obviously, because it happened again.
BYU released a statement today saying, "We are deeply concerned with the words recently used by Dr. Brad Wilcox, but the school says it appreciates his sincere apology and believes he is committed to learn from this experience." The church itself has not had a comment.
Brad Wilcox is remorseful for his hurtful comments from his previous talk.
Wilcox addressed the criticized comments during his fireside with Canadian youth on Sunday night. In his controversial talk, 62-year-old Wilcox compared black people receiving the priesthood in 1978 to white people and other races waiting for the restoration of the priesthood.
What's up with that, Brother Wilcox? In the past, I failed to see how my comments could be seen as insensitive and hurtful.
He apologized for making similar comments during several other talks in the past.
Some of you may have heard about a talk I gave last Sunday night. Now, it wasn't the first time that I've given that talk, and it wasn't the first time I've used the ideas I shared or the line of reasoning.
Friends are helping him to understand the impact of his comments.
I'm very grateful for friends like Brother Corbett, who have helped me and corrected me and taught me. Once again, I apologize.
All right, Diva, scale of 1 to 10. What do we think of Brad's apology?
Okay. Obviously, it's very low no matter what. The apology, it's important to note that he didn't apologize for the anti-Christian rhetoric, for the anti-ex-Mormon rhetoric. He didn't apologize for the sexist rhetoric, and he didn't apologize for the other stuff that the other horrific stuff that he said. The only thing that he mentioned in his apology was that he said, the exact wording escapes me, but it was something about the racial insensitivity. Well, what about the rest of the talk, which was incredibly harmful? He didn't apologize for any of that. Now, we saw Sebastian on there, who was one of the founding members of the Black Menaces, right? One of the founding members of the Black Menaces. Well, the Black Menaces wanted to talk to Brad Wilcox after this happened because, you know, the church teaches about repentance. Well, if you say you're sorry, you're supposed to follow the repentance process and try to make amends, which means to talk to the people that you might have harmed. Well, they tried to talk to him in his office, and there was literally church security, BYU security that kept them out. That's not making amends. It means trying to sit down with people, you know, eye to eye, if necessary, and try to make things right. And he didn't do any of that. It's kind of more of the Mormon church leaders, do as I say and not as I do.
Yeah. What did you think of when we had the two Brads from like 2 years apart basically giving the exact same talk?
Yeah, this is one of Brad Wilcox's absolute geniuses. Like I said, I went back and listened to a couple of hours of his addresses. And quite frankly, a lot of his stuff, if you go back to the earlier stuff, is very inspiring. I mean, he's a great speaker. His memory is really tops among any general authority, general officer of the church. I'll bet you that he has dozens of talks memorized, and he's very eloquent when he's speaking. You'll see in that Tri-State Fireside, he didn't refer to any notes ever at all. That's because he has a set of polished talks that he gives over and over again on different topics. That's why it was literally word for word with his previous statement. So it wasn't that he misspoke. It wasn't that something came out the wrong way. This was a deliberate teaching on his part that was backed, this is important, by the Mormon church itself. He wasn't out in left wing teaching something that was not correlated. This is a CES teacher who teaches at BYU. He knows his doctrine. That's the whole point. This isn't necessarily a Brad Wilcox problem. It's a wider church problem of the church's bad doctrines.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, so let's see. We got a short clip next of how the church responded. And I think this has been alluded to a little bit in that clip with you, Rebecca, and Landon. But let's watch it and see what the church did after Brad made his apology.
Response.
Effective immediately, we hereby release Bradley Ray Wilcox. It is proposed that we sustain the following: Bradley Ray Wilcox as first counselor. All in favor may manifest.
Oh no! We suck again!
So do you remember when this happened, man? I remember like people tweeting out like, "Oh my God, they demoted Brad." And then like 5 minutes later, everyone was like, "Oh shit, they promoted Brad."
Yeah, you almost thought that the church had some accountability for itself just for a moment. But when you've had the second anointing, generally there's no accountability that really happens for almost anyone. Now, there's a couple of things about the apology. Number one, BYU issued a statement about it that is substantial. Now, the church itself did not have an official statement. However, they did release onto KSL a statement about it, which is how the church kind of does these soft apologies. So the church acknowledged that Wilcox had upset people. And even though the apology, as I've already mentioned, failed to meet the mark, I want to ask you this. Can we give Brad at least the smallest bit of credit for making an apology when the Mormon church has literally a policy of President Oak saying we don't seek or give apologies? Almost no senior Mormon church leader ever, including officers, has ever given an apology. Can you give him at least a little bit of credit for saying that he was sorry?
Absolutely. He's, you know, I don't think Brad has many balls, but he's got more balls than Dallin Oaks in the Mormon church has, because he apologized for something. And people can have their opinion on whether it was a good apology, whether it was a sincere apology, but he did apologize, and that's better than most Mormon men would be willing to do. So yes, I will give him that. And there is a very small part of me that feels bad for dunking on his apology, because, and this is why, Divas, because if we do like dunk really hard on people when they do apologize, they're going to be less likely to do it in the future. Or you'll get other people like Cardinellis who goes like, this is why we don't apologize to these woke scolds. You apologize and then they do this. So just something to think about when the next person, like Jared Halverson, apologized for his stuff recently. And right. I appreciated that apology, but I know there were a lot of people who weren't.
Right. I mean, you have to give at least Brad Wilcox the smallest shred of credit for at least doing something that goes literally against Mormon unwritten policies of not apologizing. Now, I've already mentioned that his apology failed to miss the mark. Now, in your parody where you had his wife who was on the line there with the Zoom call, you kind of made it seem like she wasn't on board. What we came to find out later is that she was very virulent in the comment section where Brad apologized on his personal Facebook page.
On Facebook, she was mean to people.
She's sitting there sticking it to people, saying Brad didn't do anything wrong, and if you criticize him, you're going to hell. So that makes me think, okay, if she didn't think he did anything wrong, then maybe Brad himself didn't think he did anything wrong. Maybe it was just BYU said, hey, buddy, you're going to apologize. The church itself said, because you're a general officer of the church, you will apologize. And they put this stuff out on KSL only as a PR stunt. Now, it is hard to judge a person's motivations, but when your wife comes out swinging in the comment section, that really makes me wonder.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. All right, so after this happened, Brad, he took a little bit of a hiatus. He kind of went into hiding. We didn't hear much from him for a while. And then he resurfaced on this kind of random Mormon podcast. Yeah, Divas and I were talking earlier, and we were mentioning that Brad, one thing he does well is he gets out and he talks to people. He does a lot of podcasts.
He does.
These places a lot of these church leaders won't go. So this was one of them that he popped up on, an English guy. I think his podcast is called For All the Saints or something like that. So and this was the famous time that, of course, once Brad gets back out, he's going to say something. This is where we get the story of it was cool. He sees people on TikTok that make it look cool to leave the church, and that's why he leaves the church. So let's watch that.
Right.
The Cox.
Everybody will want to listen just because they'll think that they're talking to Harry Potter.
Brad laid low for a while. Some people thought that the Quorum of the 12 put him in a timeout at church headquarters. Some people thought he went into the mountains to hibernate. But no one really knew what happened to Brad. And for a while, things were quiet. And it was fucking nice. But things didn't stay quiet. Brad joined Ben Hancock on the For All Saints podcast to shit on ex-Mormons and tell made-up stories.
They leave so loudly. But what's happening now is that they're leaving so publicly on social media that then it seems like everyone is leaving.
Illusion, Michael.
Isn't it interesting that young people don't hesitate for a minute to post about their faithlessness, but they are terrified in today's climate to post about their faith?
Okay, bullshit.
I don't know that there's really that many more people leaving the church today than have left the church in any era of history.
You know nothing.
I mean, there's always been something that has given people an excuse to leave.
Right.
But what we don't see is the quiet people who aren't posting on social media about their faith. Because they're afraid of what people might say or what people might comment. So we see the very loud exit, but we're not seeing the very quiet coming back.
There's literally a podcast called the Comeback Podcast, Brad.
That's what I see when I'm out talking to them. I see the young people who are coming back.
Time out.
Remember that made-up story I mentioned earlier? Here it comes.
And I said, tell me about your experience in the church. He said, well, I left the church. He said, I left the church a little while ago. And I said, why? He says, oh, because it seemed popular on TikTok. It seemed popular on social media. So I just kind of joined the crowd and left the church and made a big deal about it on social media.
All right. What did you think about Brad's appearance when he came out of hibernation?
That is absolutely dreadful. First of all, he claims that people are not leaving in large numbers. So the church just released this statistical report here just recently. Is there a category, Cultch, in the statistical report that says the number of people who have had their names removed or excommunicated? Is that part of the report?
No.
No, and there's a reason that they don't include that in there. If you want to take credit for people not leaving the church, you have these numbers, go ahead and release them, but he won't. Number two, he said that you needed an excuse to leave. This is minimizing the literal trauma. These are seriously weighty decisions that people spend long periods of time on. Cultch, I was a PMO for at least 12 years, going to church every single Sunday. I didn't look on social media and think, oh, I'm going to get a couple of clicks here. This seems like a fun thing to do out there. This was something that is blood, sweat, and tears that he's just going to minimize like that. Yeah. I don't think so. You don't need any excuse. Any reason that you have whatsoever to leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is valid in and of itself. There are no excuses to leave. Now, when he comes to this type of harmful rhetoric here, he's getting it from on high. I keep saying this, that Brad Wilcox is part of a system here. He's not a cog in the system. He is the system. President Nelson himself said, never take counsel from those who don't believe, and don't rehearse your doubts with other doubters. There's a fear-mongering aspect to all of these high-demand religions, whether it's Mormonism or any other religion just like that. And he also wants to talk about demonizing faith. Listen to me. Faith is not a reliable pathway to truth. Faith is not a virtue in my mind. It is a vice. No one should be basing their life on warm, fuzzy feelings. You need to base it upon something far more substantial than that. And just a couple last points here before I get you. He talks about people are coming back in droves. From my humble research into this particular issue, I would say that approximately 3% of people who leave the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints ever come back. This is not a substantial number. It is a very much of a minority. And Brad Wilcox wants to talk about talking to ex-Mormons. Why don't you go onto a podcast, Brad, where you can talk to an ex-Mormon? No, you talked about a Cultch that he goes on podcasts more than any other Mormon leader, maybe ever. He's been on a lot of shows, including just a couple of days ago when I was researching for this episode. He really likes to connect with people. He's a real people person. Let's just be real honest about that. When has he ever gone on an ex-Mormon show? You want to talk to ex-Mormons? We're here for you. You can come on the Mormon News Roundup, and you can come onto the Cultch Show. And the last thing before I turn it back over to you is that he said that it seemed popular to leave the church, and that's a real reason. That is absolutely shameful.
Yeah, I think the fact that it seems popular lends credibility to the fact that there is a large number of people who are leaving, and those people are putting their stories online, because that's what he's insinuating. People are seeing this online. People are making it look cool, and therefore people are choosing to leave the church so that they can look cool like these influencers that they're seeing on, I don't know, TikTok or whatever the kids say. So yeah, I think he's wrong about that, but kind of proving that there's bigger numbers than he's insinuating there are. And I'm with you on the percentage of people that are coming back to the church. I mean, if someone leaves and goes back, God bless. If that's your choice to do it, and you find a way to regain your faith, or it makes sense for you to go back to church for family or whatever your reason is, God bless you. I hope it goes well for you. I wish you the best. But that percentage, like you said, is small, and the church is trying to make it look big with podcasts like the Comeback podcast, with Austin Fife and his Light on Truth letter, him talking about, I was out of the church for like 3 seconds. He was out of the church, and I decided to come back, and you can come back. And it's there are people that leave and come back. There totally are. But the church, I don't know if it's the church or just people in the church, are trying to make it seem like it's a way bigger thing than it actually is. They're trying to make fetch happen, divas, so to speak.
I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. All right, so that was most of mine, but we had one more, because there was one more interesting thing that you had talked about in the video, was the run-in that Brad had with a certain person who's in jail these days.
Oh no, there's just Brad Wilcox is the gift that keeps giving. You know, it's just, you keep peeling back the onions and you find it get more and more pungent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see this. I think people know who we're talking
Things
about.
with convicted child abuser Jody Hildebrandt, who's now serving time in prison. This highlights a disturbing pattern of enabling harmful behavior within Mormon leadership.
I was surprised at how scandalous page 1 was of the diary, and we'll explain to you why. So it starts out, this is the page 1 of Ruby Frankie's diary. It says, timeline: Jody receives blessing from Temple President Steve Kaplan. That's on May 21st, 2023. And then May 28th, meet Jeremy Yagi. Then June 13th, Jody goes to Salt Lake City to meet with Jeremy Yagi and Brad Wilcox. Why in the fetch was Jody Hildebrandt meeting regularly with Jeremy Yagi, Brad Wilcox, and a former mission president? Why was Jody Hildebrandt meeting with top church leaders? I've been told that she was consulting them on how to deal with and the epidemic of that is currently going on in the Mormon church.
Rather than confronting Jody and her dangerous rhetoric, or even holding her accountable, Brad chose to empower her, offering legitimacy to her harmful practices.
All right, Divas, for people who don't know, do you want to just give a brief explanation for who Jody Hildebrandt is?
Yeah, I can give you a shot on it. So Jody Hildebrandt was a therapist who worked a lot with Mormon communities in both in Utah County and also in southern Utah. She eventually got together with Ruby Frankie, who was a famous Mormon influencer mom who founded the YouTube channel 8 Passengers. She had 6 children, and they went really viral for showing wholesome Christian Mormon values and raising kids in truth and righteousness. They eventually got together and it turned out that, well, Ruby Frankie was abusing her children, and they both eventually got arrested for child abuse, child endangerment, and they're both currently incarcerated, serving, I believe, between 4 and 21 years in jail.
Yeah,
so these are incredibly harmful, reprehensible people who abuse children on a regular basis and had an exterior facade of a happy Mormon family. Beautiful, beautiful family, lots of great outings, made lots of money along the way, but there was but below the surface, there was a horrific tragedy that was unfolding right before people's eyes.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting that you got a guy like Brad who's meeting with this person, giving this person blessings, and yet his spirit of discernment alarm isn't going off. Because you think if that's real, he would be like, oh man, God's telling me that this woman is doing horrible things to kids, and now I can step in and help. But no, he was just, I don't know what he was doing with her, to be honest with you.
Well, it's the same type of story that we got from Dallin Oaks and Mark Hoffman. Mark Hoffman is blowing people up literally that morning, then sitting across the table from Dallin Oaks, and he doesn't see a thing.
Mark Hoffman.
Yeah, Ruby Frankie is currently abusing children, and she's meeting with multiple Mormon church leaders to get blessings. And what are they supposedly doing? Well, they're getting advice from her about how to curb the so-called problem of porn and masturbation. And my understanding, I've been told this by a couple of different people, is that they're still using some of those same principles and manuals that both of them brought forward, even though they're both incarcerated. This is absolutely reprehensible. And the fact that Brad Wilcox didn't do anything about it is shameful. Now, I don't know exactly when the 8 Passengers folded up shop, But there was a lot of warning there was a lot of warnings before they actually pulled down their YouTube channel. And I believe, I don't know for certainty, that it was after their YouTube channel basically fell apart after some of their harmful practices were brought to light, like not feeding their kids, like not giving their children lunches to go to school, by forcing their kids to sleep on beds, by forcing their children to clean all day. Now the Mormon Church is going to be taking advice from these type of people. Oh, what does that say about the values of the LDS Church? It's not good.
Yeah, I agree with you. So those were all the videos that I had queued up. Did you have anything? We're sitting at like an hour 13. I can go a little bit longer if you got anything you want to show the people.
No, I mean, I do have some Brad Wilcox videos on my channel. There's no doubt about that. I am the king of the sons of Provo, and I am the Diddly Wag Mac Mormon daddy. So I've got videos on absolutely everything. But I don't know. We're pretty good on the videos. I don't know.
Okay.
What do you think?
Okay. Right. Yeah, I think so. But we're going to be doing an after show after this. So if you haven't yet, you can go over to Patreon and search Cultch and find it. And you could join us for the after show. We do that usually, we take about a 5-10 minute break between shows, and then we convene over there. But I want to thank everybody for coming and checking this out. This was interesting for me because it was a chance to look back on what I did a year ago. And there was one comment I saw that I liked. Joey Smith had said, "Such a good edit." And you know what? This was my first like real video I did, like a long format video for YouTube. And I showed it to Jim Bennett before I put it out. And he told me, he goes, "Dude, you hit a home run on your first try." And I was like, wow. So that was pretty cool. And so and even a year later, it still holds up. So in the description, I'll put the link for it if anybody wants to go watch the whole thing. But yeah. And thank you, Divas, for joining me tonight to reminisce about launching this a year ago. Is there anything you want to plug before we sign off?
Well, just one thing, I just want to issue a formal challenge to you that I know that you're the king of Exmormon parody songs. How many do you have? Like 160, or how many parody songs do you have now?
It's over 100 for sure.
Yeah, a lot of songs. Now, I only have 15. However, I am willing to put my money where my mouth is, and I want to challenge you to a parody song contest. Now, I've only done about 15 songs myself, but I want to put your best song against mine. We're going to have the audience vote using the poll function in YouTube. We'll have your best 5 versus my best 5. They'll face off against each other. Whichever one wins will advance to the second round. And we will eventually be able to crown the king of Mormon/ex-Mormon parody songs. And I'm willing to bet you $50 that my parody songs will come out on top. Do you accept?
Of course, I'm the king of parody songs, Divas. That $50 is as good as mine.
Now, yeah, Cultch, there's no doubt about your quality level, but is it fair to say that you're only the king because no one has literally challenged you up until this point?
No one has challenged me now, but Corey makes a good point. He says, "What about Weird Alma?" And Weird Alma is kind of the GOAT, but he's not really around doing anything right now, Corey. So I'm the new king.
That is true. We'll say the video king, but I am willing. The challenge, I believe, has been accepted, so I'm willing to do it. So sometime you'll have to invite me back.
All right, you got it, man. We got it. Kendall's saying I'd win, just so you know. I don't know. Kendall's a smart guy. Kendall's really smart. Hey, all right, everybody. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just said, well, Kendall, there's only one of the two of us that is talent on loan from Kolob. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
That's a fair point. That's really fair. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week, Thursday nights, 8:05 Utah time. So tune in and check out my new Africa parody. It's good. Go check that out now. All right, everybody. Have a good night.